The U.S. has ordered the Chinese consulate in Houston to close. The State Department pointed to sovereignty violations and intimidation tactics.
The United States asked Chinese consulate staff in Houston to get out of the country by 4 p.m. this Friday. The State Department said the closure is to protect U.S. intellectual property and Americans' private information. It accuses the Chinese regime of violating U.S. sovereignty and intimidating American people. China called the move an unprecedented escalation and said it would retaliate. Reuters reported that Beijing could close the U.S. consulate in Wuhan, though most diplomats already left the city when the virus broke out. Social media videos show people burning documents on the consulate grounds. Acting chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Marco Rubio, said the closure needed to happen.
It's kind of the central node of a massive spy operation, commercial espionage, defense espionage, also influence agents to try to influence Congress.
U.S. Justice Department on Tuesday charged 2 Chinese hackers over cyber espionage that targeted defense contractors and virus vaccine research. The first time that the U.S. accusing the hackers are backed by the Chinese regime. A China affairs commentator said the move to close the consulate marks a turning point in the U.S. foreign policy principle towards China. He said in the past, the U.S. would often take into account how angry the Chinese regime will be or how they will react before making any major foreign policy decisions.
This was considerate of the so-called culture of saving face of the Chinese regime. But this is exactly what has been taken advantage of by the CCP. And one result of that is the CCP has gained the upper hand in terms of influencing U.S. foreign policy.
But this time is different.
It shows a significant change in the guiding principles of U.S. foreign policy. That is, the U.S. does not care about the feelings of the CCP anymore, nor does it care how the CCP will react. In other words, the U.S. foreign affairs behavior and decisions are based solely on America's national interest.
Recently, multiple top administration officials openly called the Chinese regime out for its misbehaviors.
The FBI is opening a new China-related counterintelligence case about every 10 hours. Of the nearly 5,000 active FBI counterintelligence cases currently underway across the country, almost half are all related to China.
The CCP has launched an orchestrated campaign across all of its many tentacles in Chinese government and society to exploit the openness of our institutions in order to destroy them.
This is actually the normal model and the normal interaction between two countries, because the two sides are truly equal and reciprocal.
This is not the first time that the U.S. has closed foreign consulates. President Trump closed a Russian consulate in San Francisco 3 years ago, and staff of the Japanese consulate in Washington, D.C. burned papers and documents in the backyard of their building in 1941 before the Pearl Harbor attack. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
2 Chinese hackers affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party were indicted for allegedly stealing intellectual property. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on the hackers and what they're accused of going after, which included COVID-related information.
The Justice Department says the 2 hackers, part of China's Ministry of State Security, stole hundreds of millions of dollars in trade secrets, intellectual property, and other valuable information globally. They apparently also went after COVID-19 related intelligence.
The campaign targeted intellectual property and confidential business information held by the private sector, including COVID-19 related treatment, testing, and vaccines.
Both hackers are also accused of stealing the private data of Chinese people who publicly oppose the Chinese regime, Hong Kong community organizers, and other information.
As I said earlier, they have done this partially for their own personal gain, it would appear, but also for the obvious interest of the People's Republic of China's Ministry of State Security.
This indictment is part of the president's China Initiative, launched in 2018, which aims at countering China's espionage and other forms of infiltration carried out by the regime. The deputy director of the FBI says this indictment is a warning.
We're bringing these charges today to put the Chinese leaders directing these cyber attacks on notice.
The FBI is looking for any information on the whereabouts of the 2 suspects. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Senator Josh Hawley wants to know if American companies are using slave labor in their products. He's introduced a bill after a new report says some large corporations could be benefiting from forced labor in China. Patrick Hayden has the details.
U.S. Senator Josh Hawley is introducing a bill to make sure large American companies aren't using slave labor in supply chains. The Slave-Free Business Certification Act expands supply chain transparency requirements and orders regular audits. It also mandates CEOs to certify that their company's products do not rely on forced or slave labor. Companies that fail to meet these basic standards will be penalized. The bill comes off the back of a report by an Australian think tank that says more than 80 companies have been tied to forced labor in China. Some of the companies implicated in the report were Amazon, Nike, North Face, BMW, and Gap. Hawley wrote on Twitter, "I challenge every major American corporation making products overseas in China or elsewhere to pledge that they are slave-free and that they do not and will not rely on forced slave labor." The Chinese communist regime is well known for using prisoners of conscience in its labor camps. Two of the largest targeted groups are Falun Gong practitioners and ethnic Uyghurs. Hawley's office wrote that the issues extend beyond China. For example, Starbucks and Nespresso rely on unpaid Brazilian workers who are denied basic needs like food and water.
Over 10,000 people in a small town in southern China are trapped due to flooding. Local authorities took extreme measures to tackle the floodwater, like blasting open an embankment.
China's Southeastern Anhui province is now in an urgent situation. In one of the towns in the region, over 10,000 people are trapped due to flooding, waiting to be rescued.
We don't have any food here. Now there's neither water nor electricity, nothing.
The flooding has devastated some local businesses.
Many of the local factories make a living producing down products. In some factories, the floodwater washed away all the down they have.
Authorities say most of those trapped by the flooding are children and the elderly. Mr. Yu, who works in Shanghai, was rushing home, trying to help evacuate his 8 family members who are trapped on the second floor of their home.
The water has flooded the first floor of the house.
On Saturday, local authorities raised the flooding warning alert to its highest level. Heavy rain and massive flooding from upstream caused water levels in Anhui province to quickly rise. On Sunday, a major river in the region saw its water level nearing a historic high. At 3 a.m., Chinese authorities took extreme measures and blew open an embankment. The floodwater then flew into 2 buffer areas. State media said the move is expected to reduce the water level by almost 30 inches. They said people living in the buffer areas have been evacuated, but didn't specify the numbers. Chinese authorities used the same tactic in 1998 during China's worst flooding in recent decades. On Monday, after another major river saw its water going above its highest warning level, authorities ordered another dam on the river to discharge the floodwater. Water spilled into another buffer area with a population of almost 200,000 people. Authorities say over 2,000 have been evacuated. On China's popular social media site, Weibo, the flooding is getting little attention. Trending keywords are celebrity news, popular dramas, and virus vaccine achievements. Reporting by Xiong Bin and Juliet Song, NTD News.
A colorful and anonymous form of protest can be seen popping up in shops and restaurants in Hong Kong. It follows the controversial security law imposed by the Chinese Communist Party that makes several forms of free speech a crime.
Blank post-it notes cover the window at Yu Yi Cafe in Wan Chai, Hong Kong. But these pieces of paper are more than just colorful decoration. They are a form of resistance. Shops used to provide space for people to hang notes expressing their support of the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. But with the tough new national security law, those displays are rapidly disappearing as people fear their messages could be used to prosecute them. So some places are taking a creative approach, keeping the note papers but leaving them blank. It's a way of remembering the popular spirit of the protests and symbolizing despair at being silenced.
I wonder if there's still rule of law if sticking a piece of paper on the wall is illegal. Actually, it looks fine to me. It's just using a different way to express our demands. If you don't allow us to protest this way, we'll find another way to protest.
Shops sympathetic to the protesters' cause are known as Yellow. Kok Kok Chicken is another Yellow restaurant. Its owner is determined to display blank Post-it notes.
The national security law has been passed. Even holding pieces of blank paper in protest is against the law and can result in arrest. We are doing this right now because here is our private property.
Hong Kong's national security law makes pro-democracy protest activities illegal. Shouting slogans or holding up banners calling for the region's autonomy is considered a violation of the law. The maximum penalty is life imprisonment.